Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7, albeit 7:20 this evening. My name is Patryk Witkowski and I'll be presenting the news bulletin. For our Ukraine update, we have day 999 of the conflict. The US decision to lift a ban on Ukraine using long-range missiles to fire into Russian territory escalates the conflict in Ukraine and will spark an immediate response, senior Russian lawmakers said on Sunday. President Biden reversed the ban on the firing of long-range missiles into Russian territory by permitting them to be used against Russian and North Korean forces in the Kursk region. The US president will allow Ukraine to use US-made ATACMS rockets, which have a range of 190 miles, 300 kilometers. A decision being justified by the presence of North Korean troops fighting alongside Russia against Ukraine. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky appeared to confirm the news, though he said any proof about the change in policy would emerge on the battlefield, if and when the missiles are used. 10 people, including 2 children, were killed and 52 were injured on Sunday night when a Russian missile hit a residential 9-story building in Ukraine's northeastern region of Sumy. Ukraine's emergency services and military have said. The attack on Sumy followed a morning of Russia pounding Ukraine's power grid in what Kiev said was a massive attack with 120 missiles and 90 drones that killed at least 7 people. The attack was the largest missile and drone assault on Ukraine since August and the first big Russian assault since the US election, showing the Kremlin in little mood to compromise after Donald Trump's victory. Ukrenergo, Ukraine's principal Ukraine energy supplier, said blackouts and consumption restrictions would be introduced in all regions from Monday as engineers try to repair as much of the damage to power facilities as possible. With a harsh Ukrainian winter fast approaching, the country is already suffering from major energy shortfalls. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk said the attack showed that talking to Russian President Vladimir Putin on the phone would not stop the war, 2 days after German Chancellor Olaf Scholz rang him. Scholz defended his decision to phone the Kremlin, telling reporters on Sunday it was important to tell Putin that he cannot count on support from Germany, Europe, and many others in the world waning. Ukraine will be top of the agenda this week at a meeting of leaders from the world's most powerful economies, Keir Starmer pledged, though he said he had no plans to follow Scholz and speak directly to Putin himself. Starmer will meet world leaders on Monday at the G20 summit in Brazil. Finland is hosting its first large-scale NATO artillery exercise since the Nordic nation joined the military alliance last year, with live fire drills starting on Sunday. The exercise conducted in the northern Lapland region in November is part of the Dynamic Front 25, the largest NATO artillery exercise ever held in Europe, with fire drills in Finland as well as Estonia, Germany, Romania, and Poland. About 1,500 supporters of Russia's exiled opposition marched through central Berlin on Sunday, led by Yulia Navalny, and chanting "No to war" and "No to Putin" in a demonstration against Moscow's invasion of Ukraine. Moving on to our Middle East update, where at least 43,922 people have been killed and 103,898 injured in Gaza since the 7th of October in 2023. Israel has been accused of trying to terrorize people after 20 people, including 15 first responders, were killed in the Duris Civilian Defense Center on the outskirts of the ancient Lebanese town of Baalbek. 5 of the dead were rendered unrecognizable by the force of the explosion. The main spokesperson for Hezbollah, Mohammed Afif, has been killed in the first Israeli airstrike on central Beirut for more than a month. The headquarters of the Syrian Social Nationalist Party was hit by an attack, which was confirmed as killing Afif by Ali Hijazi, the Secretary General of the Lebanese branch of the Ba'ath Party. Afif has been the public face of Hezbollah, appearing for the party at a press conference after the killing of the leader Hassan Nasrallah in September. 3 people were also injured in the airstrike. Meanwhile, the Israeli army said it had attacked militant targets near Beit Lahia in northern Gaza, where 30 people have been killed. 2 Lebanese soldiers have been killed after the Israeli army reportedly attacked an outpost in the south of the country. The United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon, UNIFIL, said on Sunday that a peacekeeping patrol was shot at about 40 times. A day earlier, the culprit, quote, likely being from non-state actor members. Shifting over to the UK, where a new report says that UK deprivation levels rise to the highest in the 21st century. The Guardian is reporting that a new study has found that more than 1 in 3 of children and a quarter of adults are living in poverty in the UK as deprivation levels rise to the highest in the 21st century. The study by the Social Metrics Commission, SMC, which uses measures recently adopted by the UK government, found the cost of living crisis had plunged 2 million more people into severe hardship since 2019. In total, more than 16 million people are defined as living in poverty, or 24% of the UK population. The highest since comparable records began in 2000. Children accounted for the biggest rise of any social group falling into poverty, the report found, with an extra 260,000 on the breadline since before the COVID pandemic, meaning a record 36%, or 5.2 million children were now in deprivation. It is likely to reignite calls for Labour to scrap the 2-child benefit cap, as of those 5.2 million children, more than half, 55%, lived in families with 3 or more children. About 1 in 4 of the children in poverty lived in a single-child household, with the same proportion in a 2-child family. Keir Starmer has resisted calls to abandon the policy, introduced by George Osborne when he was Chancellor, saying the government would not take the unfunded pledge without identifying a source for the £3 billion of annual cost. The Prime Minister launched a child poverty task force in July. According to The Guardian, the SMC report is significant as it measures the family's resources, not just their income, and is widely accepted to be the most accurate definition of poverty in the UK. In June, the former Conservative government announced plans to adopt this broader definition of deprivation, called below-average resources. It includes inescapable costs, such as childcare and extra costs of being disabled, plus rent, mortgages, and the family's liquid assets, such as stocks and shares, that can easily be exchanged into cash. Under the government's current definitions, which measures only average income and housing costs, 18% of the UK population was defined as being in absolute poverty in the year to March 2023, including 3.6 million children. With a new model, which is set to be adopted by the Department for Work and Pensions, DWP, 1.6 million more children are in poverty than under the current definition. The findings cover a period when living standards suffered their biggest fall since modern records began in the mid-1950s, as the COVID pandemic, followed by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, pushed the cost of goods to their highest level in 4 decades. The SMC is a non-partisan body set up in 2016 to develop a new measure of deprivation in the UK. Its commissioners include experts from the Sutton Trust, Institute for Fiscal Studies, the Centre for Social Policy Studies, Trussell Trust, and a range of respected academics. Our next story looks at Edinburgh University, which is announcing redundancy plans in response to NI increase, to the national insurance increase. Responding to the financial challenges impacting the higher education sector, Professor Sir Peter Matheson, Vice Chancellor and Principal of the University of Edinburgh, has said in a statement that the university will have to seek redundancies to try and reduce costs. In his statement, Mr. Matheson said, "Throughout this year, I have been frank about the severe financial challenges our university and the sector are facing. Today, Monday, 18th of November, I have issued an update to all colleagues on the latest developments in terms of our cost and income, and our plans to address these serious issues. The university costs £120 million £120 million each month to run, in the context of the recent sector challenges around international student recruitment, increasing staff costs since the pandemic, and the unsustainable levels of funding for Scottish and other UK students. Our outgoings are consistently higher than our income. In response to this situation, and recent developments with regards to national insurance, we have concluded that we need to take a series of actions which will include selective, voluntary, and, if unavoidable, compulsory redundancies. We will be offering staff the opportunity to find out more through a variety of online and in-person meetings, and we will continue to work with our unions and managers to help colleagues through these changes. Continuing the quote, he says, "I don't underestimate how unsettling the news will be. However, it is important that I am honest with the scale of the challenge we have and transparent about the actions we need to take to address it." End quote. Responding to the news, the SNP have today reiterated calls for the Labour government to fully fund their national insurance hikes on universities, GPs and social care providers, stating that this announcement is just the tip of the iceberg for layoffs caused by Labour's tax rises. Commenting, SNP MSP Michelle Thompson said, "We've known for some time now the destructive potential of Labour's national insurance hikes, with Universities Scotland warning of a £45 million bill if the cost of this policy was not met by the UK government. The impact won't just be felt by Scotland's universities either. Labour's national insurance tax hike could cost the Scottish government £500 million, and Scotland's voluntary sector £75 million. Today's announcement from the University of Edinburgh is the tip of the iceberg as the impact of Labour's budget becomes clear. I again urge the UK government to fully fund their national insurance tax hike for Scotland's universities." End quote. Our next story looks at households and their energy bills, which are forecast to rise to £1,736 a year from January. UK households have been warned to expect a disappointing rise in energy bills in January, adding pressure to the household finances despite earlier hopes that prices may ease early next year. The price cap for Great Britain is forecast to rise to £1,736 a year for the average dual fuel bill, according to leading energy consultancy Cornwall Insight. This is a rise of 1% from the current price cap, which increased last month to £1,717 a year for a typical consumer. The energy regulator, Ofgem, which covers Great Britain, will announce the latest quarterly cap for January on Friday, as the UK enters the heating season. The SNP said the Labour Party's broken promises on energy bills will cost households £468 during the general election campaign. Keir Starmer promised voters, quote, "My Labour government will tackle the root causes of a cost of living crisis and help families save up to £300 off their energy bills." End quote. However, since Labour has been in government, energy bills have already gone up by 10%, £149 a year for a typical household, and are now set to rise by another £19 in January. Last month, Labour Party MPs blocked an SNP amendment to the GB energy bill, which could have forced the UK government to reduce energy bills by £300. The Labour Party also blocked another SNP amendment that would have forced the UK government to regularly update Parliament on the progress it is making on lowering energy bills. Pensioners who received the £200 to £300 winter fuel payment and the £300 pensioner cost of living payment last year will now be up to £600 worse off this winter, after the Chancellor abolished both payments for the overwhelming majority of pensioners, including around 900,000 Scottish pensioners. SNP Westminster Energy spokesperson Dave Dugan MP said, Scottish households are not only woke up this morning to snow and frost, but to the news that energy bills are rising again under a Westminster Labour government. Keir Starmer and the Labour Party promised voters he would reduce energy bills by £300, but instead bills have gone up again on the Labour Party's watch. A typical household will now be paying £168 more a year come January. Having promised to cut energy bills by £300 to win votes during the general election, the Labour Party's broken promises on energy bills will now cost households £468. It's shameful that some of the poorest and most vulnerable people will be forced to choose between heating and eating this winter as a result of Labour Party cuts. The G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro is underway with President of Brazil, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, having opened the G20 meeting in Rio de Janeiro with the launch of an alliance to combat hunger, which he described as the ultimate symbol of our collective tragedy. Brazil holds the rotating presidency of the group and is hosting the meeting this Monday and Tuesday, attended by all but two, Russia and Saudi Arabia, and then the rest of 19 member countries are attending. In his speech, Lula recalled attending the first G20 meeting in the US in 2008. 6 years later, I regret to say that the world is worse, he said. In a litany of the world's current problems, the left-wing leader included the highest number of armed conflicts since the Second World War, the largest recorded displacement of people, extreme weather phenomena, and deepening social, racial, and gender inequalities. Lula said the scourge that shames humanity was hunger and poverty, with 733 million undernourished people worldwide, according to figures from the UN's Food and Agriculture Organization. In a world that produces nearly 6 billion tons of food every year, this is unacceptable, he said, addressing the leaders including Joe Biden, China's Xi Jinping, and UK's Keir Starmer, and France's Emmanuel Macron. 81 countries have backed the plan, but initially it seemed that only 18 of the 19 G20 members had signed up. Argentina, whose far-right president, Javier Milei, has previously described Lula as a communist and did not initially back the plan, but later came around after negotiations. Earlier, Spain's economy minister had urged the world's richest countries to be brave and redouble efforts to reach an agreement on a global minimum tax on the world's 3,000 billionaires, saying recent elections have shown citizens are demanding redistribution of wealth. Speaking during a visit to London before the gathering of G20 leaders in Rio de Janeiro today, Carlos Suerpa said the plan had gained political momentum since the summer, when finance ministers agreed to work together to ensure that the ultra-high net worth individuals are effectively taxed. Brazil backs proposals to raise an estimated $250 billion a year from the world's billionaires by ensuring they pay taxes worth at least 2% on their assets. It is expected to push for formal negotiations on global wealth taxes when it hosts next year's COP climate summit. France, Germany, and South Africa have expressed support, saying the money is needed to help climate-vulnerable nations and drive green investment. In our next story, the UN climate chief tells COP29 delegates to cut the theatrics and tackle climate change. Simon Steele, the UN's climate chief, had said that countries meeting in Azerbaijan to focus a new global financial settlement for tackling the climate crisis must, quote, cut the theatrics and get down to serious business. The UK and Brazil have been drafted to try to break a logjam in the COP29 climate summit, which entered its second week on Monday with no agreement in sight on the key issue of how to channel at least $1 trillion a year to developing countries. Poor nations need the money to cut greenhouse gas emissions and cope with the impact of extreme weather. Rich countries stand accused of failing to come up with cash to help them. Officials from nearly 200 countries worked last week to draw up the text of a potential deal, but many countries have sent ministers with decision-making powers to the Azerbaijan capital, Baku, only for the second half of a fortnight-long meeting. Simon Steele, the UN's climate chief, told the conference, "Ministers who have just arrived need to roll up their sleeves and dive into the hardest issues. Bluffing, brinksmanship, and premeditated playbooks are burning up precious time. So let's cut the theatrics and get down to the real business this week." He reminded rich countries that it was in their interest to help the poorest, which are suffering from the impacts of extreme weather but have done little to cause global heating. Climate finance is not charity, he said. It is 100% in every nation's interest to protect their economies and people from rampant climate impacts. Mukhtar Babayev, Azerbaijan's environment minister and the president of the talks, said politicians have the power to reach a fair and ambitious deal. They must deliver on this responsibility. They must engage immediately and constructively. The highest possible level of ambition is indeed difficult, and it requires courage. Colleagues, now is the time to be brave. Sticking with the theme of climate, where we have climate scientists warning that the world's 1.5 Celsius climate target is deader than a doornail. Climate scientists have gloomily concluded that the international agreed goal to keep the world's temperature rise below 1.5 degrees Celsius is now deader than a doornail, with 2024 almost certain to be the first individual year above this threshold, despite world leaders gathering for climate talks on how to remain within this boundary. 3 of the 5 leading research groups monitoring global temperatures consider 2024 on track to be at least 1.5 degrees Celsius, 2.7 Fahrenheit, hotter than pre-industrial times, underlining it as the warmest year on record, beating a mark set just last year. The past 10 consecutive years have always been the hottest 10 years ever recorded. Although a single year above 1.5 Celsius does not itself spell climate doom or break the 2015 Paris Agreement, in which countries agreed to strive to keep the long-term temperature rise below this point, scientists have warned this aspiration has in effect been snuffed out, despite the exhortations of leaders currently gathered at a United Nations Climate Summit in Azerbaijan. Last year was so surprisingly hot, even in the context of a climate crisis, that it caused real concerns amongst climate scientists. In recent months, there has also been persistent heat despite the fading of El Niño, a periodic climate event that exacerbated temperatures already elevated by the burning of fossil fuels. Climate scientists broadly expect it will become apparent that the 1.5 Celsius target, agreed upon by governments after pleas from vulnerable island states, and that they risk being wiped out if temperatures rise further than this, and that this limit has been exceeded within the coming decade. Despite countries agreeing to shift away from fossil fuels, this year is set to hit a new record for planet heating emissions. And even if current national pledges are met, the world is on track for a 2.7 Celsius, 4.8 Fahrenheit warming, risking disastrous heat waves, floods, famines, and unrest. We are clearly failing to bend the curve, said Sofia Gonzalez Zuniga, an analyst at Climate Analytics, which helped produce the Climate Action Tracker, CAT, temperature estimate. In the face of this, COP29 talks in Baku have maintained calls for action to stay under 1.5 Celsius of a rise. On Tuesday, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres told world leaders, "Only you can beat the clock on 1.5 Celsius." Which, while also acknowledging the planet was undergoing a masterclass in climate destruction. The world's decision makers, who are collectively failing to stem dangerous global heating, will soon be joined by Donald Trump, who is expected to tear down climate policies and thereby, the CAT report estimates, add at least a further 0.04 Celsius to the world temperature. Despite the bleak outlook, some do point out that the picture will still looks far rosier than it did before the Paris deal, when a catastrophic temperature rise of 4 Celsius or more was foreseeable. Cheap and abundant clean energy is growing at a rapid pace, with peak oil demand expected by the end of the decade. Shifting over to America, where the DOJ and FBI officials consult lawyers amid threats of the Trump legal retribution. Officials from the Justice Department and FBI have begun consulting lawyers amid fears that they will be prosecuted when Donald Trump returns to the White House, according to U.S. media reports. The concerns have been driven by Trump's vows to seek retribution against members of a deep state that he claims deliberately set out to undermine him when he was president, and falsely alleges that they were weaponized against him after he left office. They have been intensified by the president-elect's nomination of a right-wing former Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz as Attorney General, a position that would put him in charge of the Justice Department and America's federal law enforcement agencies. Gaetz, who himself underwent a 2-year FBI investigation into sex trafficking allegations that ended without charges, was chosen after reportedly telling Trump that he would go over there and start cutting F-word heads. He had previously called for a full court press weaponized. He had previously called for, quote, a full court press against the weaponized government. In a social media post, he said this. If that means and further quote, if that means abolishing every one of the three-letter agencies, from the FBI to the ATF, that's the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, I'm ready to get going, he continued. The threats had prompted serving and retired officials to contact defense lawyers, even though they are convinced they have committed no crime. NBC reported. Several DOJ officials were said to be very upset following Trump's election victory over Kamala Harris because so many Americans believed Trump's narrative that the Justice Department had been corrupted and weaponized to conduct a political witch hunt against him. A former senior Justice Department official who served during Trump's first presidency said that the choice of Gaetz was a mark of the incoming president's seriousness about seeking payback against those he believed had wronged him. Trump bears a grudge against the Justice Department after it pressed charges relating to his attempt to overturn the 2020 presidential election, which he falsely claimed was stolen. It also investigated his improper retention of classified documents from his presidency, which he kept in his Mar-a-Lago home. Charges from both investigations were rolled into an inquiry conducted by the special prosecutor, Jack Smith, who was appointed by the current Attorney General, Merrick Garland. Trump has repeatedly assailed Smith and, during the election campaign, called for him to be thrown out of the country. During the campaign, Trump repeatedly said the choice of Attorney General would be his most important cabinet appointment. Observers say his goal is to assert control over the Justice Department, which has been accepted as being politically independent from the White House interference since Watergate. Back in the UK, the Scottish Government call on UK government to scrap the UK voter ID. Scottish Government's Minister for Parliamentary Business has said the requirements for voter identification brought in by the previous UK government should be scrapped. Jamie Hepburn highlighted evidence from the Electoral Commission that the new requirements kept potential voters away from a ballot box at the recent UK parliamentary election, and fears misunderstanding around the need for ID could have a similar impact in Scotland. In a letter to Rushanara Ali MP, Parliamentary Undersecretary of State, which tackles housing, communities, and local government, he asked for the UK government to consider scrapping voter ID requirements. In the UK, in Scotland, the former Strathclyde Student Union building is to be transformed into a £30 million digital entrepreneurial and social engagement hub. The University of Strathclyde's former Student Union building on John Street will be transformed into a digital, entrepreneurial, and social engagement hub, thanks to the support of a successful alumni donor? Oh, I guess the donor is an alumnus donor. The building will be named the Charles Huang Advanced Technology and Innovation Center, CHATIC, in recognition of a £30 million contribution to the project by Dr. Charles Huang, global business leader and founder of private equity firm Pacifica Capital Inc., which was part of a larger £50 million donation he made through his foundation to Strathclyde in 2021, the university's largest ever philanthropic gift. Situated in the heart of Glasgow City Innovation District, CHATIC will provide additional research facilities for advancing health technologies, 5G communications, industrial AI, fintech, quantum technologies, and space research, alongside housing, an innovation and entrepreneurship hub, and a social innovation hub. With space for businesses to co-locate with the university, CHATIC will create a critical mass of companies, innovation support organizations, cutting-edge research, and community engagement facilities that will deliver increased economic and social impact. The building has lain empty since Strath Union moved to its new home in the university's Learning and Teaching building on Richmond Street in 2021. Though part of the building incorporates the university's combined heat and power district heating system. Scheduled for completion in 2026, the refurbishment of the 10-story, 5,536 square meter former Student Union premises, originally built in 1959, will emit around 67% less carbon when compared to a new build, while retaining a building which holds many memories for Strathclyders and Glaswegians more widely and continuing to contribute towards the city. Professor Sir Jim MacDonald, the Principal and Vice-Chancellor of Strathclyde, said, "I am delighted that CHATIC will facilitate new opportunities to partner and innovate with industry, enhance research capabilities by actively developing our research leaders of the future, grow entrepreneurial and social innovation opportunities open to staff, students, and the wider community. And it will create opportunities for our students to engage with industry research partners. We are hugely grateful to Charles for his very generous contribution to this project and are delighted to recognize this through the naming of a new building." Another 50 schools share the £150,000 Scottish Government funding to mark Book Week Scotland. To mark the start of Book Week Scotland, it has been announced that 17 projects will benefit from the Scotland Library Improvement Fund, SLIF, between 2024 and 2025. Among the projects, the More Reading for Mental Health Initiative, which operates at Fraserburgh, Inverurie, and Mintlaw Academies in Aberdeenshire, will benefit. It uses campfire-themed kits with tents, replica campfires, and nature toys to create a calming atmosphere for storytelling sessions, and has been awarded £12,260. The sorry. Craigie Book Bleffer at Edinburgh's Craig and Tinney Primary gets £3,200 to help foster a reading community, engage parents, and raise attainment for reading picnics in the library. Education Secretary Jenny Gilruth said, as Book Week Scotland gets underway, it's an important time to reflect on the vital role school libraries play in supporting improved literacy and communication skills in our children. I am very pleased to see a range of creative projects benefit from the funding, which will ultimately encourage more young people to read for enjoyment. That wraps up the news bulletin for the day. Before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. We set our current fundraising target in April, hoping to achieve £36,000 by the end of the year. It is November and we have raised £16,500. However, to pay our bills and survive, we need to raise £12,000 now to get us back on target. We face costs of over £4,000 every month, but only receive donations of around £2,500. We need more regular subscribers, but we need to clear our debts as well. We are at a crisis point and really need to increase our donations to be able to pay our bills and survive. Our programs will always be free to view. However, if you can afford the £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, and please donate whatever you can. Thank you. I've been Patryk Witkowski. I've read the bulletin for you this evening, and I bid you farewell. Till next time.